Sometimes the worst wounds don't come from betrayal. They come from the tests we create out of fear. I thought I was clever, that I could protect my heart by hiding the truth, but I was only building a lie big enough to bury myself in. They say every man wants to know if the woman beside him would stay if the money disappeared. I just didn't know that finding out would cost me everything I thought love was. The night I met Zuri, the city of Lagos was glowing with its usual chaos, horns blaring, laughter spilling from street stalls, the air thick with the scent of roasted corn and exhaust. I was standing outside my father's newest construction site in Ikeja, pretending to inspect blueprints, but really watching her from the corner of my eye. She moved like someone who didn't know the world was watching, confident, calm, and utterly unaware of how her presence could bend time. Her hands were covered in dust, her shirt damp from the heat, but she smiled as though she carried light beneath her skin. I'd met 100 women dressed in luxury, but none had ever looked as radiant in sweat and dirt as she did in that moment. My name is Adeyemi, first son of one of Lagos's wealthiest industrialists. In my world, love is currency, and loyalty is often for sale. I'd grown up surrounded by wealth so suffocating it turned affection into a transaction. Every relationship I'd ever had ended the same way. Smiles that faded when the gift stopped coming. Promises that dissolved when the driver wasn't waiting at the gate. I'd stopped believing in the kind of love that stayed when the lights went out. Until Zuri, she wasn't part of my world. She lived in a small apartment in Surulere, rode Danfo buses to school, and laughed when the wind tangled her hair. There was something about her simplicity that terrified me, because I wanted it, and I didn't trust it. I wanted to believe she could love me for who I was, not for what I owned. But the fear of being used had already taken root too deep inside me. That fear became an idea, poison disguised as curiosity. What if I stripped away everything that defined me? The mansion, the cars, the name. What if I let her see me as just another man? Would she still hold my hand if there was nothing in it to offer? So I crafted a plan. I told her I was a mechanic's assistant working in a small garage in Ejigunla. I swapped my tailored suits for faded jeans, my watch for one that barely ticked. I left my house in Banana Island and rented a one-room apartment with a leaking roof and a fan that rattled through the night. My friend Tunda thought I was insane. "You don't test love by lying," he said. "You test it by trusting." But I wasn't listening. The ghosts of my past had made me deaf to wisdom. The first day Zuri saw me in my disguise, I expected her to pull away. Instead, she laughed. "You look different," she said teasingly. "More human." We spent evenings eating soya by the roadside, her fingers warm against mine, her stories wrapping around me like music. She never complained when I couldn't afford gifts, never flinched when I came home smelling of engine oil. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a name, but as a man. But love built on lies has a ticking clock, and mine was already counting down. There were moments, small, fleeting, when I'd catch her looking at me as if she was searching for something she couldn't name. Once, while we sat by the lagoon, watching the sunset bleed into the water, she said softly, "I don't care about money, Aid. I just want to know that what we have is real." Her voice trembled on that last word. Real. It felt like she could see through me, and I hated how close she was to the truth. I told myself I'd reveal everything soon, that once I was sure of her, I'd take her to the mansion, show her my real life, and watch love survive the shock. But fate doesn't wait for perfect timing. It strikes when your lies are most fragile. One evening, as we walked past the market, Zuri stopped suddenly, her hand tightening around mine. Her eyes were gentle but heavy with meaning when she said, "Aid, I think it's time I meet your family." The world seemed to freeze around me, the noise of the street fading until all I could hear was the sound of my own pulse. I smiled weakly, pretending to agree. But inside, my heart began to unravel. Because the family she wanted to meet didn't exist in this version of me. And as her fingers slipped from mine, I realized for the first time that the lie I had built to protect love was about to destroy it. They say love built on truth can heal any wound, but love built on lies bleeds quietly, until one day it dies without a sound. I didn't see it happening at first. I thought I was in control, that my little deception was harmless, even noble, a way to protect my heart from disappointment. But the moment Zuri smiled at me across that flickering lantern light, I felt something shift deep inside, something I didn't yet have the courage to name. Because in trying to test her love, I was slowly breaking the very thing I claimed to protect. Our story continued in the narrow streets of Ajagunle, beneath the golden haze of evening, where life never paused long enough for anyone to dream too loudly. I would meet her after work, hands still slick with grease, sweat glistening under the harsh sun that melted the skyline. She never complained about the heat, or the noise, or the smell of the engine oil that clung to me. Instead, she'd laugh and wipe a smudge off my cheek, her fingers soft, her heart even softer. That touch alone made me forget that every gesture of hers was being weighed, measured, analyzed by the quiet voice in my mind that refused to believe it could be real. One evening, I took her to a small canteen tucked between two buildings, painted in colors the rain had tried, but failed to erase. The floor was cracked, the tables uneven, but the food smelled like home, spicy, rich, familiar. As we ate, I told her the same lie I'd repeated for weeks, that I couldn't afford restaurants or cinemas, that my salary barely covered my rent. She smiled, reached for my hand across the table and said, "Ade, I came for you, not for food." Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they pierced through my chest with quiet precision. I wanted to believe her. Truly, I did. But every time she said something kind, my heart whispered, what if she's just pretending to love the struggle? I couldn't silence it. I couldn't trust what I'd never experienced, love untouched by privilege. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm I both craved and feared. We'd stroll through the markets, our laughter mixing with the calls of street vendors. We'd share roasted corn by the roadside, our shadows long beneath the setting sun. She spoke about her dreams, owning a boutique someday, traveling to Ghana for fabric, maybe even seeing Paris if life allowed. I listened, pretending to be a man whose dreams were smaller than hers. I let her believe I couldn't afford, even hope. But as her laughter filled the air, I saw what she didn't say. There were moments, fleeting but sharp, when her gaze lingered too long on the girls who stepped out of shiny cars, when her smile faltered as she counted coins at the counter, when her silence stretched too long between our sentences. It wasn't greed, it was longing, the kind that lives in people who have known hunger too long to ever forget its taste. Each night, when I lay alone in that cramped apartment, her words echoed through me, fighting against my guilt. She was loving a man who didn't exist, trusting a life that wasn't real. And yet somehow, I was falling for her truth while drowning in my lies. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I took her to the garage where I worked. She arrived wearing a red headscarf that caught the light and made her look like she'd stepped straight out of a dream. My coworkers teased and whistled, calling her a Yawo mechanic, the mechanic's wife. She blushed, laughed, and helped me wipe oil from my arms. But when her laughter faded, I caught a flicker of sadness in her eyes, a distant look that whispered of exhaustion, of doubt, of a woman wondering if love could survive without comfort. That night, we sat by the lagoon, the sky bruised purple by twilight. The wind smelled of salt and secrets. Zuri leaned against me but said nothing for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, uncertain. "Ada," she whispered, "do you ever think about where we're going?" Her question wasn't about direction. It was about destiny. I looked at her, wanting to promise her forever, but every word, caught in the web of my deceit. "Of course," I lied, forcing a smile. "Love always finds its way," she nodded, But her eyes didn't believe me. The next evening, I went to her apartment with a heart full of questions and a silence heavy enough to drown in. She opened the door, her expression calm but hollow, her smile practiced and distant. Something in her had changed, subtle but irreversible. Her laughter, once bright as morning, had dimmed into something that sounded like politeness. When I reached for her hand, she didn't pull away, but her fingers felt colder than I remembered. That was the moment I understood. The lie that had begun as my protection had become my punishment. The test wasn't about her anymore. It was about how long I could watch love die and still pretend it was alive. There are moments when love doesn't vanish. It simply changes shape, slipping into the eyes of the one you thought you knew, until you no longer recognize yourself reflected there. It was in those eyes, once soft and unguarded, that I saw a distance forming, quiet and patient, like a tide waiting to pull me under. I didn't need words to know the truth. Her silence had started speaking fluently in a language my heart already feared. I had built this test to see if she truly loved me. But now it was my own heart that stood trial, and every look from her felt like a verdict I wasn't ready to hear. Zuri's laughter used to arrive before she did, bright, unfiltered, filling every room before her footsteps caught up. Now it came carefully, like she was rationing joy. Her visits grew shorter, her messages fewer. Even when we sat together, her mind seemed to drift to places where my voice couldn't follow. I told myself it was work, stress, exhaustion, but deep down, I knew better. Love doesn't just fade. It learns how to hide when it feels unsafe. We still kept our little rituals, Friday walks through the market, sharing roasted plantain from a street vendor, teasing me about my oil-stained hands. But there was something new in the way she looked at me, a softness mixed with pity. It stung worse than anger ever could. She would ask if I'd eaten, if I'd rested, her voice dripping with kindness. But behind it, I heard the unspoken question, how long can you live like this? That Friday, the sky over Lagos was a bruise-colored haze, heavy with the promise of rain. I walked her home after work, my body aching from the day's labor. The streets shimmered with the glow of headlights reflected in puddles, the air thick with the smell of fried yam and exhaust. She walked beside me in silence, her scarf pulled tight around her hair, her steps careful and measured. I tried to tell her about a customer at the garage, about how we fixed a broken transmission in record time, but her responses came like whispers, lost in the wind. When we reached her compound, I noticed it. A sleek black SUV parked across the street, its chrome edges catching the faint orange of a nearby street lamp. A man leaned casually against the door, his posture relaxed, but his eyes locked on her with quiet familiarity. He was well-dressed, confident, his wristwatch glinting like a deliberate statement. Zuri froze for the briefest moment, then forced a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's my colleague," she said quickly, fumbling for her bag. "He helped me when I was behind on rent. He's just giving me a lift sometimes." Her words were simple, but the pause between them screamed louder than the Lagos traffic around us. I nodded, pretending to understand, pretending to be the humble man she thought I was, the one too proud to question, too poor to possess. "Ah, so work people are this generous now," I said with a strained laugh, my voice betraying nothing but my chest burning quietly from within. She looked at me then, her eyes soft with something that felt like guilt, or maybe pity. "Aid, it's not what you think," she whispered. But it was already too late. I wasn't jealous of the man. I was jealous of the ease with which she could explain him, the casual comfort in her voice when she spoke of him helping her. Because in that moment, I realized something that nearly undid me. She no longer saw me as someone who could help. My lie had turned me into a man who needed her mercy instead of her love. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain hit the roof of my tiny apartment, like 1,000 unanswered questions. Each drop reminded me of her laughter with that man, the one I'd never heard but could imagine too clearly. I thought of all the ways I could end this lie, how easily I could call her, confess everything, tell her I wasn't who she thought I was. But the fear was stronger. What if her smile disappeared when she realized the truth? What if the love I had tested broke the moment it was no longer humble? The next few days passed like shadows, stretching longer before sunset. Zuri's calls grew shorter, her texts delayed. When she came by, her perfume lingered longer than she did. The sparkle in her eyes, the one that used to make me forget every doubt, had dimmed, replaced by something gentler, sadder. Then one night, it happened. I was on my way home from the garage when I saw her again. She didn't see me. The black SUV was parked under the same flickering streetlight, its headlights slicing through the fog. She stepped out of the passenger seat, her laughter echoing faintly through the humid air. It wasn't forced this time. It was real, light, musical, the kind of laugh that once belonged only to me. I froze in the shadows, half hidden behind a wall, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The man stepped out too, smiling at her, handing her a paper bag before brushing her shoulder lightly. She didn't flinch. She didn't look uncomfortable. She looked at peace. It was the longest few seconds of my life. I wanted to shout her name, to remind her who I was, or who I used to be. But I couldn't move, because for the first time, I realized something far crueler than betrayal. She hadn't stopped loving me. She had simply started loving someone who didn't exist anymore. She turned then, still smiling faintly at the SUV before walking toward her compound. Her eyes caught the dim light for just a second, and I saw it, the absence. The warmth that once belonged to me was gone, replaced by a calm detachment that felt like a funeral I wasn't invited to. I watched her disappear into the darkness, the hum of the SUV fading as it drove away, and I stood there, drenched in rain and silence, knowing that the stranger I'd seen in her eyes wasn't her. It was me, reflected through a lie too deep to escape. There are nights when love stops feeling like home and starts sounding like footsteps you can't ignore. The heart becomes a detective, chasing ghosts it created, searching for truths it isn't ready to face. That night, when the rain swallowed Lagos in silver sheets and thunder rolled like the echo of my mistakes, I told myself I just wanted to see her smile again, to remind myself she was still mine. But deep down, I knew I wasn't chasing Zuri anymore. I was chasing the version of her that existed before my lies taught her to doubt me. The rain had begun, long before I started the engine of my old Corolla, its tired wipers screeching across the windshield like warnings I refused to hear. Ahead of me, her silhouette moved beneath the dim glow of streetlights, stepping gracefully into that sleek black SUV I'd come to dread. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I followed, headlights off, keeping a cautious distance. Every corner we turned bled into another reflection of neon lights and puddles, and with each passing minute, the city seemed to blur between reality and something darker, something personal. The streets were half empty, the night heavy with the smell of rain-soaked dust and fried plantain from distant stalls. I told myself that maybe I was wrong, that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But jealousy has a way of erasing logic. It paints your mind with conclusions your eyes haven't even confirmed. The SUV slowed near Victoria Island, outside a small cafe with fogged windows and the soft hum of jazz spilling into the street. I parked a few meters away, engine idling, my heartbeat louder than the rain. Through the glass, I saw her. Zuri sat near the window, the glow of the pendant lights haloing her in gold. She looked radiant, more alive than she had in weeks. Her laughter floated across the glass, silent but visible, and it struck me how long it had been since I'd seen her eyes light up like that. With me. The man across from her leaned forward, smiling, saying something that made her cover her mouth in amusement. I watched her reach for the napkin, wiping a tear of laughter from her cheek, and in that instant, I felt like a ghost. Alive, but erased from the story. Then it happened. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the table between them with the ease of someone who had done it before. My heart clenched. I watched her hesitate, fingers trembling as she opened it. The light caught something inside, a delicate chain, glimmering faintly, or maybe a ring. Whatever it was, it carried the weight of intimacy. Her lips parted, a quiet gasp, and then she smiled. A soft, genuine smile that broke something in me cleanly, like glass underfoot. I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my breath fogging the glass, the sound of the rain filling every corner of my silence. I wanted to believe it was friendship, gratitude, anything innocent. But there was no innocence left. Not in me, not in her, not in the world we'd built on a lie too fragile to survive the truth. Minutes passed. Maybe hours, I couldn't tell. When they finally stood to leave, the man held the umbrella above her, his hand brushing her shoulder as they stepped into the rain. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. And that simple, wordless gesture said everything I had been too proud to ask. They turned toward the SUV, and then she saw me. Her body froze mid-step, the umbrella tilting, the world narrowing into that one shared look. Our eyes met through the rain-streaked glass, and in that suspended second, everything we had built, every laugh, every promise, every whispered "I love you," collapsed under the weight of what we both already knew. Zuri's lips parted slightly, a silent gasp, guilt flickering across her face like lightning. She whispered something to the man beside her, then stepped away, her heels splashing against the wet pavement as she crossed toward me. The rain blurred her features, but I could still see the ache in her eyes, the kind that says love still exists, but no longer knows where to live. She stopped beside my window, breathing hard, her hair sticking to her face, rain dripping down her neck. Her voice trembled when she spoke, each word heavy with defeat. "Aid, you shouldn't have come." Her tone wasn't anger. It was sorrow dressed as restraint. It was the sound of someone who had already mourned what was lost. I wanted to ask her 1,000 things, but the truth was already written in her silence. She turned slowly, walking back toward the SUV, the umbrella waiting like a dark invitation. The taillights painted the rain red as the car pulled away, leaving me alone in the reflection of everything I'd done wrong. The city roared around me, but all I heard was the echo of her words, "You shouldn't have come," and I finally understood that I hadn't just followed her that night. I had followed the ghost of the man I used to be, straight into the ruins of my own deception. Some heartbreaks don't come with screaming or shattered glass. They arrive quietly, like a whisper in the dark, carrying the weight of every lie you ever told. When Zuri's message lit up my phone screen, I was half drunk, half lost, sitting alone in my room where regret had become the only furniture that mattered. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." 10 words. That was all it took to turn every lie I had built into a funeral. I had imagined heartbreak 100 different ways, anger, betrayal, maybe even forgiveness. But I never imagined it would come wrapped in silence, delivered by a woman who once swore her heart beat, only for me. For a long time, I didn't move. The city outside was alive, the hum of traffic, the laughter of street vendors, the faraway rhythm of drums from a distant wedding. But inside, Lagos was quiet. The message glowed on my screen like an open wound. My chest tightened, not just with loss, but with shame. I had tested love like it was a game, and the only prize left was loneliness. I wanted to call her, to beg, to explain. But what could I possibly say? That I had loved her so much I'd rather lie than risk losing her. That my fear had dressed itself in poverty and pretended to be humility? No apology could make that sound noble. The following days passed like a dream with no sound. I walked through Lagos without hearing it. The honking danfos, the traders calling out prices, the chaos that usually filled every corner of the air. I was there, but I wasn't living. I haunted the city like one of its forgotten ghosts, breathing but not belonging. I found myself at the bar Tunda, and I used to go to after long days, a small wooden shack by the roadside where men carried their disappointments in bottles and left their dreams beneath plastic chairs. The night smelled of dust, diesel, and rain waiting to fall. The bulb above the counter flickered weakly, bathing the bar in tired yellow light. I sat there for hours, nursing the same drink, watching the foam die at the edges of the glass. That's when Tunde walked in. He didn't ask why. He already knew. He just looked at me for a moment, then said, "You built love on sand, Aid. Now you're drowning in your own test." I laughed bitterly, because the truth always sounds cruelest when it's simple. "I just wanted to know she wasn't with me for money," I said. He looked at me the way a brother does when he's run out of ways to protect you from yourself. "And what about her? Did she ever get to know you? The real you, not the ghost of your fear." His words hit deeper than the liquor ever could. I thought about Zuri's eyes, how they used to light up when I spoke of dreams, how they dimmed when I spoke of limits. I had asked her to believe in a version of me that didn't exist, and then I'd punished her when she couldn't love what wasn't real. I had built a lie so heavy that even love couldn't lift it anymore. Tunde left after a while, but his words stayed behind, echoing between the bottles. I sat there long after the bar had emptied, the night pressing against me like judgment. Around me, Lagos still pulsed with life, the laughter of strangers, the sound of high-life music from a nearby club, but I felt like I was underwater, hearing everything through guilt. Somewhere deep inside, a voice I had been ignoring for months finally spoke. "If you want forgiveness, stop hiding." The next morning, the city woke in slow gold. I hadn't slept. I walked to the mirror, stared at the stranger staring back, and realized I didn't hate him. I pitied him. The poor man costume, the fake humility, the lies, all of it had been armor against rejection. But love cannot live in armor. It suffocates there. I pulled out the suit I hadn't worn since my father's funeral, crisp white, smelling faintly of mothballs and memory. I brushed the dust off the cuffs, polished my shoes until they reflected the morning sun, and strapped my father's gold watch onto my wrist. The man staring back wasn't the mechanic from Ajagunle. He was the son of Adewale Olorunfemi, a man who had once believed that truth, no matter how late, was still better than deception. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my phone. For a long while, I just stared at her contact name, afraid of the silence that might follow. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I typed the words that had been burning inside me since that night. "Meet me tomorrow. There's something I need to show you." I pressed send, my thumb hovering over the screen until the little blue tick appeared. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of every lie I'd told, every moment I'd wasted hiding from my own heart. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to, but I knew she would come. Zuri always needed closure, and this was one ending she deserved to see, written by the truth. That night, I didn't drink. I didn't try to sleep. I just sat by the window, watching Lagos breathe beneath the streetlights, wondering what truth would cost me this time. Forgiveness or forever. The next morning, just before dawn, my phone buzzed softly against the table. Her message flashed across the screen. "I'll be there." My heart skipped a beat. I exhaled, staring out at the horizon where the city met the rising sun. Tomorrow she would see the real me, not the lie I'd built, but the man behind it. What I didn't know then was that truth, once spoken, doesn't just set you free. Sometimes it burns everything you're trying to save. Some truths are not born to heal. They are born to wound us open, to carve through the lies we've built until only the raw, unguarded heart remains. I had spent months hiding behind my own deception, convincing myself that love could survive a lie if the lie was noble enough. But when the morning came, when the truth finally sat heavy in my hands like something alive and trembling, I realized that honesty delivered too late is just another form of betrayal. The air felt thick that day, Lagos wrapped in the slow heat of the afternoon sun as I pulled up in front of her compound. The Range Rover purred quietly beneath me, gleaming black against the gold of the light. It wasn't just a car. It was a confession on wheels, every polished surface reflecting the life I'd hidden from her. When Zuri stepped out of her gate, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. She looked at me, at the vehicle, then back at me again, her lips parting as if words might help her understand what her eyes already knew. "Aid," she said softly, her voice uncertain, almost afraid. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's still me," I said. "Please get in." She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and sat quietly beside me. The silence between us was louder than any accusation. I could feel her gaze tracing every detail: the fine leather seats, the faint cologne in the air, the watch on my wrist that caught the sunlight as I shifted gears. We drove through the city, past the crowded streets of Surulere, through the tree-lined avenues that led toward my family's estate in Ikoyi. She didn't ask questions, but I could sense the tension building inside her with every turn of the road. When the gates opened and the car rolled up the marble driveway, her breath caught audibly. The mansion stood before us, tall, white, and quiet, its fountains whispering secrets into the afternoon. The guards nodded as they saw me. The staff bowed slightly when I entered. For the first time in months, I was stepping back into my own life, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Zuri followed me inside, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. Her eyes moved from the chandelier above us to the paintings lining the walls. It wasn't awe I saw in her. It was distance, as if every bit of wealth around her was building a wall she couldn't climb. "I need to explain," I began, my voice uneven. "Everything you knew about me was a lie. The job, the apartment, the story. I made it all up." She didn't interrupt. She just stared at me, her face unreadable. "I wanted to know if you loved me for who I am, not for what I have. I needed to be sure." My voice cracked on that last word, the weight of it collapsing everything I'd tried to justify. "Zuri, every moment with you was real, even if the world I showed you wasn't." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She stepped closer, her voice low but steady. "So you lied to test my love?" I nodded slowly, the truth sharp in my throat. "Yes, but I swear—" She stopped me with a small, tired smile. "You didn't test my love, Aid. You tested your fear." Her words hit harder than any anger could have. She turned away, running her fingers along the cold marble table as if searching for something to hold on to. "You say you wanted to see if I loved you for you," she whispered. "But all you proved is that you never trusted that I did." I reached for her hand, desperate, but she stepped back, her voice trembling, not with rage, but with heartbreak. "You built a lie to find the truth," she said softly. "And now you've lost both." She looked around, one last time, her eyes empty of wonder. Then she walked toward the door, sunlight catching in her hair like a last goodbye. And in that moment, standing in the house that once felt like a kingdom, I realized the truth I had held so tightly wasn't saving me. It was destroying me, piece by piece. Wealth only shines when there's someone to see it with you. Otherwise, it becomes a mirror that reflects nothing but regret. The day Zuri walked out of my life, the house that once echoed with laughter turned into a cathedral of silence. The marble floors felt colder, the chandeliers too bright, and every polished surface mocked me with the reflection of a man who had everything, except peace. People talk about heartbreak as if it's noise, a loud tearing sound. But mine was quiet. It lived in the way the air felt heavier, in how footsteps sounded wrong, in how my own name didn't feel like mine anymore. After she left, I couldn't sleep in the master bedroom. I moved into one of the smaller guest rooms at the back of the house, the same way I had once moved into that tiny apartment to play poor. But this time, I wasn't pretending. This time, I really was small. The walls of the mansion stretched too wide around me, swallowing sound, swallowing memory. The staff walked softly, their eyes avoiding mine, as though my heartbreak was something contagious. My father visited once, a week after the breakup. He walked through the house, slowly, his cane tapping against the marble floor like a metronome of judgment. When he reached the balcony, he turned and looked at me, with a weariness that went beyond disappointment. "A man who tests love," he said quietly, "only learns how to fail it." I didn't respond. What could I say? That he was right, that I'd inherited not just his fortune, but his fear. The fear of being loved for the wrong reasons? My father sighed and placed his hand on my shoulder, his voice softening. "Son, trust isn't something you earn by lying. It's something you give, and sometimes lose. But if you never risk losing it, you'll never have it at all." When he left, the house felt emptier than before. Even the clocks seemed to tick slower, their rhythm offbeat, as if time itself had stopped believing in me. I threw myself into work, spending long nights at the office surrounded by screens, reports, and numbers. Success became my drug. I signed deals, expanded branches, and collected achievements like armor. But every time I returned home, the silence waited for me, like a loyal enemy. Sometimes I caught myself setting 2 plates at the dinner table out of habit. Other times I'd walk past the guest room and imagine her sitting there, her laughter spilling into the hallways, soft and unguarded. I told myself that time would fix it, that eventually love fades the way perfume does, lingering, then gone. But love doesn't fade with time. It echoes. It finds ways to remind you it was real, especially in the spaces where it no longer lives. Months passed before I found the courage to go through the things she left behind. A few clothes, a perfume bottle with only a trace of scent left, and one small envelope, sealed and creased from being handled too often. I remembered she had left me a note the day she walked away. Back then, I had read the first few lines, and when it became too painful, I folded it back and buried it in a drawer. Now, sitting in the quiet of my office, the night pressing against the windows, I took it out again. Her handwriting was soft, familiar, filled with the kind of care that makes you ache. "Ade," it began. "You taught me that love isn't about wealth or poverty. It's about truth. I just wish you had trusted mine enough to see that before it was too late." The ink had smudged slightly where my thumb brushed it. My chest tightened as I read on, each line a blade carved with tenderness. But as I unfolded the paper completely, my heart froze. There was more. The page wasn't just one sheet. It was 2, thinly pressed together. I had never noticed the second one. My hands trembled as I separated the papers, the faint scent of her perfume rising like a ghost between them. The second page was shorter, the handwriting rushed. My name was written at the top, followed by a line that made my blood run cold. "If you ever find this, then something I couldn't tell you in person still matters. There's something you need to know about the man in the SUV." I stared at the words, the edges of the page fluttering in my shaking hands. Suddenly, the silence of the mansion didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, watching, waiting. Some truths arrive too late to save what they could have healed, yet they still pierce deep enough to make you wish for another chance. That second page felt alive in my hands, trembling with the ghosts of every word I had silenced between us. I had spent months drowning in guilt, convinced Zuri left because of the lie, because I wasn't enough. But her handwriting, soft and steady even through her pain, told me a story I was never brave enough to hear. Love doesn't always vanish when it ends. Sometimes it lingers to remind you that what you broke was real. The ink on the page had faded slightly, the edges curled from time, but her presence poured through every line like a heartbeat preserved in paper. My eyes moved slowly, tracing the familiar loops and curves of her letters, each one pulling me deeper into the echo of her voice. "I didn't leave because you were poor," she wrote. "I left because you never believed I could love you without proof." I read the line once, then twice, until the words began to blur and reform through tears. It wasn't anger she had written with. It was sorrow. That realization cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Her love hadn't died because of what I lacked. It had withered under the weight of my doubt. I had given her affection dressed in fear, and called it protection. I had built walls to test her heart, never realizing that walls can't hold love. They only bury it alive. She went on. "I prayed every night that one day you would find peace. Not wealth, not control, not perfection. Just peace. Because the man I loved was never poor. He was just afraid." I could almost hear her voice as I read it. The same gentle tone she used when she told stories about her childhood. The same quiet warmth that once made my lies feel heavier than chains. I felt her forgiveness in every word, and that was what hurt the most. Forgiveness has a way of humbling you more than anger ever can. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, until the sound filled the house like an old hymn. I walked to the window, the letter still in my hand, watching as the city blurred beneath the storm. Somewhere out there, she was living a life I had forfeited, building a peace I was too proud to deserve. For the first time in a long while, I whispered her name, not as a question, not as a plea, just as a memory I finally had the courage to honor. I went back to the letter, desperate for more. The last lines were shorter, written hastily, as if she had run out of time or courage. The words trembled slightly, the ink darker where the pen had pressed too hard. "I loved you beyond the lie. I loved you beyond what you feared of me. But love can't breathe where doubt lives. I hope someday you'll understand that what I wanted wasn't your riches. It was your trust." I sank into the chair, my chest tightening with every word. Trust. That was the one thing I had refused her, the one thing no amount of money could buy back. My father's words returned to me. A man who tests love only learns how to fail it. And I had failed spectacularly. I reached the bottom of the page, and just when I thought it was over, I saw it. A final sentence written smaller, as though meant to be found only when the pain was ready to listen. The ink was smudged, but I could still make it out. "If you still believe in us, meet me where we first met." For a long moment, I couldn't move. The air around me seemed to still. The world outside, the rain, the city, all of it faded until there was only that one line echoing inside my head. My heart began to pound, not with hope, but with the terror of wanting something you no longer believe you deserve. I stood, the letter trembling in my hands. That cafe, the one in Yaba where I'd first seen her sketching designs on a napkin, flashed in my mind like a memory refusing to die. Could she really be there after all this time? Could love, once shattered, wait long enough to be found again? I grabbed my keys, my chest tight with a feeling I couldn't name, something between hope and punishment. As the rain eased outside, I whispered the words I'd never said to her before. "If you're still there, Zuri, I'll come." Memory is a cruel storyteller. It takes you back to the same street, the same scent, the same light of an old evening. But it never gives you back the same person. As I drove through Yaba that night, the rain had just stopped, leaving the streets glistening like mirrors reflecting all my mistakes. Every corner, every stall, every familiar sound felt alive with ghosts of a time when love was still innocent, when laughter came easily, and when the truth hadn't yet learned how to wound. I wasn't sure what scared me more, that she might be there, or that she might not. The Suya stand stood exactly where it always had, beneath that flickering yellow bulb that buzzed like an old secret trying to speak. The smoke curled upward, carrying the scent of spice and charcoal, thick with the kind of nostalgia that makes your heart ache before you even see what you came for. And then, through that haze, I saw her. Zuri. She stood a few feet away, her back straight, her head tilted slightly as if listening to the music of a memory only she could hear. The yellow scarf she wore caught the glow of the streetlight, the same one from that night, years ago. The one I'd once told her made her look like sunlight pretending to be human. She hadn't changed much, but there was something quieter about her now. The kind of peace that comes after too much pain. When she turned, our eyes met, and time folded. The years between us disappeared, replaced by the soft rush of something I couldn't name, but had missed every single day since she walked away. "You came," she said, her voice carrying that familiar gentleness, a melody I'd memorized long ago. "You called," I replied, though the words came out heavier than I meant them to. Regret sat between us like another person, breathing through the silence. We stood there for a moment, the night humming around us, the sound of traffic, the chatter of vendors, the laughter of strangers who didn't know they were standing on the ruins of a love story. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the distance that my pride had built. But I stayed still. I didn't know if I still had the right to close the gap. Finally, she smiled. Small, careful, as if afraid it might break. "You still remember this place?" "How could I forget?" I said quietly. "It's where I stopped pretending long enough to fall for you." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something softer, almost sad. "And it's where I learned that love isn't enough when truth is missing." Her words cut, but I didn't flinch. I had lived long enough with guilt to know that truth always deserved its place in the conversation, even when it hurt. We walked slowly toward the same wooden bench by the roadside, the one where we had sat years ago, our fingers brushing for the first time, laughing about the future like we had any control over it. Now we sat there again, two people shaped by time, carrying scars that once had each other's names on them. "I read your letter," I said finally. "Every word, every prayer. I didn't deserve that kind of forgiveness." She looked at me for a long time before replying. "I didn't write it for you to deserve it. I wrote it because I needed to let go of the anger. You can't heal in hate." Her strength humbled me. For years I had thought of her as the one who broke me. But now, sitting beside her, I realized she had been the one trying to save us both. From my lies, from my fear, from myself, the suya man laughed with another customer. And for a brief second, the sound pulled us both back to that first night, when she had teased me for calling suya fine dining, when the world still felt simple. "Do you ever wish we could go back?" I asked, not expecting an answer. She didn't look at me. "Sometimes," she said. "But then I remember, we'd still make the same choices. You'd still test me, and I'd still walk away. Maybe that's how it was always meant to be." Her honesty was sharp, but her tone was soft, like someone who had made peace with the pain. I nodded, staring at the smoke rising from the grill, disappearing into the dark. Then, after a long silence, she turned to me, her eyes glistening with something unreadable. "Ede," she said quietly. "You never asked who that man really was." Her voice carried the weight of something I hadn't been ready to face. My chest tightened. My pulse quickened, and suddenly the air between us felt charged, not with anger, but with revelation. I swallowed hard, afraid to ask, but more afraid not to. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth that was about to change everything. The cruelest blindness isn't the one caused by darkness, it's the one born from pride, the kind that makes you see only what you fear, instead of what's true. As I sat across from Zuri under that flickering streetlight, her eyes calm but distant, I realized how much destruction can come from a man too proud to trust love. I had crafted an illusion to test her heart, but it was my own that had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, gentle but carrying the quiet ache of someone who'd rehearsed this truth for far too long. "That man you saw," she began, her gaze meeting mine without flinching. "The one you followed. He wasn't who you thought." I blinked, the words not landing right away. "Then who was he?" I asked, my tone more defensive than I meant it to be, as though I still needed to protect the ruins of my pride. She drew a slow breath, the scarf around her neck fluttering slightly in the night breeze. "He's my half-brother. His name is Emeka." For a moment everything stopped. The noise of the street, the smell of roasted suya, the hum of passing cars. All of it faded until only her voice remained. "My brother," I repeated dumbly, my mind stumbling over the word like it didn't fit the world I'd built in my head. She nodded. "He came back from abroad a few months before everything fell apart. He wanted to reconnect. I didn't tell you because—" She hesitated, eyes lowering to her hands. "Because he's from the same family that disowned my mother." I didn't want pity. I didn't want questions. Her words cut through me with quiet precision. Every late-night argument in my mind, every image of betrayal I'd tortured myself with, all of it dissolved into nothing. The pain I'd built like a monument suddenly looked ridiculous, small, self-inflicted. I wanted to speak, to apologize, but guilt wrapped its hands around my throat. My heart thudded with shame as I remembered the way I'd doubted her, followed her, accused her in silence. I had turned love into suspicion and called it wisdom. I thought— My voice cracked, the rest of the sentence refusing to form. "Zuri, I thought he was—" "I know what you thought," she said softly, cutting through the fog of my regret. "And I can't blame you for it. You never trusted me enough to see past your fear." Her forgiveness, gentle as it was, only deepened my shame. I buried my face in my hands, the weight of every choice pressing down on me. I had set a trap to reveal her motives, but all I'd exposed was my own insecurity. Zuri leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. "You spent so much time trying to see if I could love you poor," she said quietly, "that you never stopped to ask if I'd love you broken." The words landed like a prayer, disguised as a wound. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman I'd fallen for, the one who laughed easily, who dreamed loudly, who believed love was something you give freely, not something you make someone prove. And I had destroyed that. For a long moment, we both said nothing. The night hummed with the sounds of the city, distant horns, soft music from a passing car, laughter that belonged to other people living easier stories. When she finally reached into her purse, I thought she was leaving. Instead, she placed something small on the table between us. It was a velvet pouch, worn at the edges, the kind used to hold something fragile and precious. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers brushed the pouch softly, like she was saying goodbye to whatever was inside. "You once told me," she said slowly, "that when you finally had enough money, you'd buy me a ring. Not a fancy one, just simple, something real." My breath caught. I remembered that night clearly. Me laughing as I promised her a ring from a tiny street jeweler, and her teasing me that love didn't need gold to feel real. Zuri pushed the pouch toward me, her eyes glimmering with a sadness too deep to touch. "I bought it instead," she said. I reached out with trembling hands and opened it. Inside, nestled against the dark velvet, was a small silver ring, plain, delicate, and heartbreakingly familiar. The metal felt cold against my skin as I lifted it, my vision blurring with unshed tears. "You kept it?" I whispered. "I waited," she said softly. "But love can't wait forever." Then she stood, her chair scraping softly against the pavement, and walked into the night, leaving me alone beneath the buzzing light, clutching the ring I was never meant to give. The street that had once held our laughter now echoed with everything I'd lost. And for the first time, I realized the real test had never been hers. It had always been mine. Some wounds don't bleed anymore, but they still ache when touched by kindness. I had spent years trying to forget the sound of her voice, yet the moment Zuri said my name again, the walls I'd built around my heart began to crumble. The night air wrapped around us like a memory, thick, humid, familiar, and there, between the faint glow of the suya stand and the hush of the street, she held out her palm. In it lay the one thing I had lost long before her love, the ring that once symbolized everything I promised, but never gave. For a moment, I couldn't move. The silver band shimmered faintly under the yellow light, and something inside me broke open. That small circle of metal carried the weight of 10 years of regret. I reached out, hesitant, my fingers trembling. "You kept it," I said, the words escaping as a breath more than a question. She nodded slowly, her expression calm, almost sacred. "Because I wanted to believe you'd find your truth someday," she whispered, "even if I wasn't there to see it." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the softness beneath, the same eyes that once saw good in me before I buried it under my pride. I swallowed hard, the realization hitting like thunder. For all the years I'd accused her of betrayal, she had been the one holding on to faith. She had carried love quietly, like a secret prayer, long after I had let fear destroy it. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," I said finally, my voice breaking. Zuri's gaze didn't waver. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," she said. "It's about releasing what's already killing you." The words settled deep, reshaping everything I thought I understood about love. For years, I had mistaken control for protection, tests for truth. But now, staring at her, I saw what love really was. Risk, vulnerability, surrender. And I had run from it all because I was afraid it would see me too clearly. Tears blurred my vision as I spoke again, barely able to hold her gaze. "If I could go back," she interrupted softly, shaking her head. "You can't, but you can start again. The only question is, will you?" The quiet between us was almost unbearable. The night felt like it was listening, waiting for me to answer the question I had spent my entire life avoiding. My throat tightened as I took a slow breath. "Yes," I said finally. "I want to start again. But this time, no lies, no games, no pretending to be less than I am." Zuri smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't erase pain, but forgives it. "Then promise me something," she said. "Promise me you'll stop hiding who you are. From me, from the world, from yourself. Because if you keep living behind masks, you'll end up alone again, even when love finds you." Her words struck deep because they weren't just a condition. They were truth. The kind of truth that saves or destroys, depending on what you do with it. I nodded, the weight of that promise heavier than any ring I could ever give her. We stood there for a while, two souls learning how to breathe again. She reached for my hand, and I felt her warmth travel through me, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. The street around us had gone quiet. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. When I looked at the ring again, it no longer felt like a reminder of failure. It felt like a beginning. A second chance, wrapped in silver and sorrow. "Can we really start over?" I asked, my voice trembling between hope and fear. She looked up, eyes glistening with tears she didn't let fall. "We can," she said, "as long as we don't try to rewrite what happened. We carry it, we learn from it, and we choose each other anyway." The next morning, sunlight poured through my window like forgiveness itself. I dressed simply, no designer suit, no mask of wealth, just me. When I arrived at her door, Zuri stood waiting, her yellow scarf fluttering in the breeze. Without a word, I reached for her hand, and she let me hold it. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. I smiled through the weight in my chest. "To meet my father," I said. "This time, There's nothing left to hide. As we walked toward the estate gates, the city waking behind us, I realized, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. They say every man thinks he's testing love, until love tests him back. For years I thought I was in control, the architect of my destiny, the examiner of hearts. But standing before Zuri on the morning of our second chance, I realized I had never been the one holding the pen. Love had been testing me all along, and I had failed every question that required honesty. The sun over Lagos that morning was soft and golden, filtering through the mango trees that shaded my father's garden. The house that once felt like a monument to pride now stood as a witness to humility. My father sat quietly among the guests, his face calm, almost reflective. There were no expensive cars lined outside, no chandeliers, no magazine photographers waiting to capture the spectacle of wealth. Only laughter, truth, and people who had seen us survive our own mistakes. Zuri walked toward me in a simple white dress that moved like a sigh in the breeze. Her hair was pinned back with gold clips, her sebahai, scarf gone, her smile steady. There was no glitter, no pretense, no performance, just the woman who had once believed in a man I had pretended to be. As she reached me, I felt time slow. Every lie I had told seemed to dissolve under the weight of her gaze. I had built walls of deceit to protect myself from pain, but she had loved me enough to walk through the ruins without looking away. When the officiant asked if I had anything to say before our vows, I turned to the guests and then to her. My hands trembled as I began to speak. I once thought love had to be proven, I said, my voice breaking. I thought wealth, comfort, and trust were traps, that people only loved what they could benefit from. So I hid behind a mask, believing that truth was too fragile to survive the real world. Zuri's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence was grace. I continued, my chest tightening with every word. But I learned the hard way that love doesn't need proof. It needs truth. And the woman who stands before me today taught me that what you test with doubt, you destroy with pride. The guests fell silent. Even the air seemed to pause. I reached for her hands, holding them as if they were the only things anchoring me to the earth. I'm not promising a perfect life, I said quietly. I'm promising a truthful one. And if love is a test, then this time, I'm ready to fail honestly. Her lips trembled into a smile, the kind that forgives without needing to forget. The officiant spoke the final words, and when I kissed her, it wasn't the dramatic ending of a story. It was the quiet beginning of something we had both earned through fire and forgiveness. Later, as evening fell and the garden filled with music, I stepped aside, watching her laugh under the fading light. She looked free. For the first time, so did I. The weight I'd carried for years, of wealth, deceit, fear, was gone. In its place, there was something new. Peace. I realized that love doesn't need to be tested by poverty or disguise. It's tested by truth, by how much of yourself you're willing to reveal, even when you're afraid it might not be enough. That night, when the guests were gone and the house had fallen silent, I found her sitting by the window, still wearing the ring I'd once promised to buy when I had money. She looked at me with quiet certainty and said, "Now you understand. Love was never the question, Aid. You were." And as I knelt beside her, my hand over hers, I whispered the truth that had taken me years to learn. I pretended to be poor, to test your heart. But in the end, it was my soul that failed, and your love that saved me. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Tell me in the comments, do you believe true love can survive a lie? Your thoughts matter more than views. They're the heartbeat of this channel. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay with me, because the next story will remind you that sometimes love's greatest test is forgiveness.